I guess I welcome Dr. George Beko for this conference. He is a great surgeon out of Canada, Toronto, and he's a close friend. He's done several live surgery demonstrations with us. He's a constant visitor to India, and he is on the editorial board and review board of at least 30 international journals. So he's a great cataract surgeon, and thank you very much, Dr. George Beko. Can we have his video for sending this presentation? Yeah, that's fine. You can just put on his video now.
I would like to thank the organizing committee of the AIOS for inviting me to be part of the program. Today, I'd like to share with you a case of a traumatic cataract that resulted from a blunt trauma involving a projectile. These are my financial disclosures. None of them are relevant to this talk. So the case is that of a 15-year-old male who presented to the emergency department 3 hours after an injury to his right eye. The mechanism of the injury was that he was standing close to his father, who was mowing the lawn. The blades of the lawnmower propelled a stone which struck him in the right eye. Examination revealed that the vision was hand motions barely. There was a large central epithelial defect. There was corneal edema. The anterior chamber was formed with dense hyphema. Iridodialysis was evident. The intraocular pressure was 16 by applanation, and no detail of the lens or retina was possible on examination. Ultrasonography was performed and revealed that the retina was flat. So in summary, we have a blunt trauma injury which has resulted in significant disruption of the anterior chamber, but there's no evidence of any rupture or penetration into the eye itself. The treatment was to use atropine and Tobradex eye drops. The patient was followed on an almost daily basis. By day 5, he had a 3 millimeter hyphema. The epithelial defect had resolved. The lens was noted to be white, and the intraocular pressure was 11. By day 17, a superior blood clot overlying the area of probable iridodialysis was noted, and the IOP was 17. By day 40, the hyphema had resolved. There was no blood clot. A white cataract was still evident. The IOP was 10, and ultrasonography revealed that the retina was flat. At 2 months, we were left with a white cataract. The IOP was 15. There was no inflammation evident, and ultrasonography continued to reveal that the retina was flat. The plan was for the patient to undergo cataract surgery during the new year after his school examinations. Examination prior to surgery revealed the following. He had a white cataract. Since this had formed fairly recently after his injury, the assumption was that there was a capsular rent, either anterior or posterior. There was evidence of fibrosis superiorly. Posterior synechia abounded. There was traumatic mydriasis with an atonic pupil and a suspected area of inferior zonular dialysis. The white cataract is our main concern, as there is some suspected capsular rent causing this. Initially, we start introducing vision blue into the eye, but quickly realize that this may be a mistake, as a suspected inferior zonular dialysis would allow the vision blue to go into the vitreous cavity and affect our visualization later in the case. So viscoelastic is used to blockade that area. Vision blue is then reintroduced to stain the capsule, and then viscoelastic is used to expel the vision blue from the anterior chamber. The viscoelastic is used to tamponade the anterior capsule and the contents of the capsule, while we create our capsulorhexis. A lot of fibrosis on the surface of the anterior capsule makes this capsulorhexis somewhat difficult, but manageable if we go slowly and use the capsulorhexis forceps. Having created the capsulorhexis, we introduce our phaco tip and quickly remove the liquefied contents. We are always wary that there may be a capsular rent and vitreous present, but luckily this is not the case. We then remove the remaining cortex using our IA and confirm that there is no capsular rent present. Our next step will be to introduce the viscoelastic and the IOL into the bag. A 3-piece IOL is chosen prior to the case, as this would allow us the most flexibility, allowing us to not only place the lens into the bag, but also allow us the luxury of placing it into the sulcus or fixating it either to the sclera or iris if complications deemed that this was necessary. Having placed the lens into the bag, we now address the traumatic mydriasis using microforceps. The iris is pulled towards the center and any of the adhesions to the angle and anterior synechiae are lysed. As you can see, most of the mydriasis is inferior, and this is where we are doing our pulling. Once we've deemed that enough has been done in order to allow us to do a pupilloplasty, we then introduce our teneproline on a curved needle and take a number of bites along the inferior 180 degrees. We then bring out the needle through the cornea As I said earlier, our goal here is to make the pupil smaller inferiorly, so we've cut the needle off. We now pull one end of the suture out through the main wound and then pull the second and the other end of the suture out in the same area, pulling the needle through that wound, and then we will tie inferiorly so that the iris is made smaller and the pupil is made smaller in this area. As you can see, we do this and then we repeat the process again in the lateral aspect of this eye in order to create a semi-round pupil. So having taken two purchases, we've now completed and tied and made a smaller pupil. At the conclusion of the case, we can see that we've addressed the patient's traumatic cataract and traumatic mydriasis and have obtained a very good result for him. In summary, this case demonstrates blunt injury in a pediatric aged individual. We know that blunt injury is more common in males and can occur in a ratio of 12:1 when compared to females. It is usually unilateral. In India, about 75% of the injuries occur in those of lower socioeconomic status, and 92% usually from the rural areas. In terms of the mechanism, wooden sticks, firecrackers, and bows and arrows are the most common causes of blunt eye trauma. And as this case demonstrates, it is possible to have secondary or delayed surgery if there's no prolonged inflammation or uncontrolled IOP or retinal detachment. Also, if the patient is outside of the amblyogenic age, meaning that he's older than 7 or 8 years of age, and in cases in which follow-up can be assured. Thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, George, for the excellent presentation. I think you showed great surgical skills. Can you Yeah, so welcome friends to the instruction course on phacoemulsification, that is simplifying the complex. So I have a galaxy of speakers with me, and without much ado, we can go into the instruction course. I'll first wish to introduce Dr. D. Ramamurthy. Dr. Ramamurthy, can you have your presentation up?
Yeah.
Yeah, Dr. Ramamurthy, as you all know, he is the chairman and the founding director of the Eye Foundation Group of Hospitals, and he has been the past chairman scientific committee of AIOS and the past president, and is an excellent surgeon, above all an excellent academician, and he's done his work earlier, his studies from JIPMER and then at the All India Institute and then Shankar Netralaya. So he's been trained at the best of the institutions. And Dr. Ramamurthy is the first speaker, and he's going to talk about phaco in the unstable back and deficient capsule. And after that, Dr. Gitansha will come on and would be giving her talk on complex cases. Yeah, Dr. Ramamurthy, please.
You can see my slides?
Yes. Just need to make it full screen, please.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's fine.
Thank you so much, Dr. Maipal, and it's indeed an honor to be part of this course, and also thank you for accommodating my request to come in a little early. I'm just going to show you a series of video clippings, and this is congenital subluxated cataract, Marfan's disease, and this is one of the few situations where I go ahead and use a high molecular weight viscoelastic, because getting a good rhexis is extremely important, and I think, and also you have to realize that centering your rhexis on the capsular bag is important rather than centering it on the pupil, because the ultimate position of the intraocular lens is going to depend upon the position of the capsular bag, which is going to be tethered to the sclera. And that's the getting a capsular rhexis is extremely important. Usually aim for a slightly smaller rhexis, and then subsequently adequate hydrodissection. No rotation of the lens is done, because that might compromise whatever little support that is there. Then you introduce the endocapsular ring as late as possible, but as early as it's required. In this case, since the capsular bag seem to be fairly stable, it's mostly phacoaspiration that is needed in these soft cataracts. I'm going ahead with the surgery, and you can see that I use a bimanual IA for removing all the cortical material. And this is one of the situations where I would do a capsular polishing. As you can see over here, I'm a little concerned about the capsular phimosis that can sometimes occur with these subluxated lenses. And I've got a slightly smaller capsular bag in this capsular rhexis in this situation. So it might be one situation where I would do a capsular polishing. The endocapsular ring, since I found the bag to be quite stable, goes in right in the end. This is a slightly older video, but since in Marfan's it's a progressive condition, I might have considered putting a CTS or a Sionis ring now, but on the table, since it appeared very stable and it was a limited displacement of the lens that I had, I go ahead and put in a conventional endocapsular ring, and also put in a single piece lens within the bag, and that's the end of the surgery. Now, going on to a slightly different situation, here you can see it's a traumatic cataract, and already you can see the area of the dialysis, which is quite obvious. In these situations, it's always a good idea to go ahead and stain the capsule, and once, because you need a good control over the capsular rhexis. And I believe in these situations, once you get an adequate capsular rhexis, which is reasonably well centered, almost 50% of your surgery is done. And it's extremely important that the capsular rhexis is intact. These are iris hooks. Capsular hooks may be even more beneficial. But once you tether the capsular bag onto the limbus, then you find that the entire procedure comes under better control. As I said earlier, in this case, because the capsular bag was a little more unstable, I go ahead and introduce the endocapsular ring a little early. This in traumatic cataracts is not a zonulopathy, which is progressive. So that's the reason that if you're able to get a fairly stable bag on the table, that's what you are going to leave the patient behind with. And that's the reason that I'm just introducing an endocapsular ring. And you can see that all the maneuvers have to be quite simple, and it's also lower parameters are used in these cases. It's always a good idea to prolapse even the nucleus into the anterior chamber and do an anterior chamber phacoemulsification. This is a lens with zero asphericity which is implanted, because this is the one which is most tolerant as far as displacement of the bag is concerned. This is a lens. You can see I'm proceeding with phacoemulsification. I did not expect it, but as I went ahead with the chopping, I could see there was a significant zonular dialysis that was there, which was essentially in this region. So what I'm going to do is to, this was also a fairly shallow anterior chamber. You can see the peripheral hydrotomy over here. So immediately I just fill in with viscoelastic. I introduce the endocapsular ring in place, and then subsequently place a capsular hook that is going to tether up the capsule. And once you have this hook in place, then there is a certain amount of safety with the endocapsular ring also in place. You feel that things are much more calmer, under better control. And as I was mentioning in the earlier case, in these situations, using adequate amount of dispersive viscoelastic, it might be a good idea to do most of the phacoemulsification after prolapsing the nucleus into the anterior chamber, because you want to disturb the bag as little as possible. It's a good idea to introduce the intraocular lenses subsequent to removal of the capsular hook, but sometimes it can be done even with this in place. It was a single piece intraocular lens that was planned. That's the reason I had a 2.2 millimeter incision. But I always feel that whenever you have a three-piece, whenever you have a problem of a capsule not being adequate and being a little tremulous, it's a good idea to introduce a three-piece lens, and preferably in the sulcus with an optic capture. And you can see it's a multifocal lens that was planned in this situation. Even then, we have a stock of multifocal diffractive lenses that are available. Even in these situations, I would not hesitate to switch over to the three-piece lens. And this is what you see on the first post-operative day. There was a strand of vitreous which is coming into the anterior chamber. That was also adequately dealt with towards the end of the surgery. And just in case you have a more extreme situation like this, where you find that there is a it's again a case of a Marfan's, but you can find that the displacement of the lens is significantly more. And you can, this is here again, getting a capsular rhexis is the greatest challenge. You have to remember that whether you're using the laser platform or whether you're using it manually, getting the rhexis reasonably well centered on the capsular bag is extremely important. These are soft cataracts. That's the reason that I'm just using irrigation aspiration to remove the lens material, and exactly opposite to the area where there's maximum displacement of the lens, I'm going to tether this lens with a Sionese ring. There is an eyelet over there. A Hoffman's pocket might be an even better idea, but I prefer these scale pockets, which I think adequately buries the suture. And you can see that Sionese ring being slipped up. You cannot use an endocapsular ring injector in these situations. It's extremely important that the position of the Sionese ring is right opposite to the area of maximal displacement. That's the reason I'm swinging it over, so that it corresponds to the area of maximal displacement. And it's a 9-0 Prolene suture. Nowadays, Gore-Tex suture is also available, which is threaded through this. And then subsequently, you can see the entire capsular bag settling down, and it is being hooked onto the sclera. You can just have a multiple passage of the suture through the sclera, or create a suture, and subsequently it's again a three-piece lens in this situation being injected into the bag. And this is what you see post-operatively. This 3 months later, that's the Sionese ring which is holding the bag in place. And you can see it's a reasonably well-centered lens, and you can see just the edge of the Sionese ring over there. I think I'll skip this for want of time, but this is just a capsular dialysis. Just for the sake of completion, I'd just like to show this video where we essentially use a femtosecond platform. I think a femtosecond laser is a great tool as far as doing the subluxated lenses are concerned. And here I'm essentially shifting the femtosecond layer, the capsular rhexis to center. Maipal, I'll finish in less than a minute. To center it on the capsular bag, you can see that these are all the zonular stent that I have. There's no zonules here, no zonules here. And in these cases, I do not want to pick up the rhexis, but just go in with the bent 26 gauge needle. so as to just gather up the rexes, causing minimal traction, no hydrodissection, obviously, and no rotation of the lens. There's an adequate hydrodissection that's performed so as to free up the lens from its, so that removal of the lens material is easy. As I mentioned already, it's even a good idea to prolapse the lens material into the anterior chamber. And this is the endocapsular ring that's going into its place. And you find that the overlap of the endocapsular ring is not there in the maximum area of subluxation. And so it's swung around a bit, and then it's an intraocular lens which is introduced into the capsular bag. The final slide of just a half a minute, and just in case the subluxation is too much, it might be a good idea to do away with the entire capsular bag and implant a scleral fixated lens, or in my case, a iris fixated lens. I believe that today, with the advances that have been with the scleral fixation of intraocular lenses, and also the experience with iris clip lenses, whenever you are faced with a complex situation of extreme subluxation, it's a good idea to remove the entire bag and do a secondary lens implantation. Thank you so much for your kind attention.
Thank you, sir, for the wonderful presentation. So all of these were like really difficult cases, but you managed them really well, and a lot to learn from you. And we'll have the discussion at the end if the time permits. And next, I invite Dr. Gitansha Sachdev. She'll be speaking on femto laser-assisted cataract surgery in complex cases. Dr. Gitansha, please.
Thank you, Dr. Hemlata. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Are my slides visible as well? Hello?
Yeah, slides are visible, Gitansha. Go ahead.
Thank you. A very good evening to all of you. So today I'll be discussing with the management of certain complex cataract cases using the femtosecond laser platform. I have no financial disclosure. Now we're all aware that the femtosecond laser has brought about an unparalleled precision to the conventional phacoemulsification, and certain exceedingly important steps such as the capsulotomy and the lens fragmentation can be carried out with a lot of predictability. Now, these advantages become even more pronounced in certain complex cataracts, and I'll be dealing with a few of these cases in my subsequent slides. The wide cataract still remains a challenge vis-a-vis the capsular rexes. We're all aware that there is an increased intralenticular pressure in these waterlogged cataracts, because of which there is a high propensity for a capsular runoff, also known as the Argentinian plaque sign. Additionally, other conditions such as a poor red reflex or any associated zonulopathy can make matters worse. So getting a capsulotomy right is of utmost importance because it allows you a safe in-the-bag phacoemulsification. Also, it gives you an adequate sulcus in the event of a posterior capsular rupture, wherein you can implant a lens into the sulcus. The femtosecond laser works in a closed system, so the Argentinian plaque sign does not occur. The important things to remember here is that one should always stain the capsule with tryphon blue in these cases, because there might be an egress of a certain milky fluid which could interfere with the subsequent femtosecond delivery and result in uncut areas. Then one just goes on to meticulously pull the capsule or bring the capsule in the center in a circumferential fashion akin to a regular capsular rexis. The femto-assisted nucleotomy in these waterlogged cataracts is suboptimal. Moving on to the hard cataracts or dense nuclear sclerosis, which we all know is a challenge, especially in diabetic patients where the nucleus is leathery and hard. And this has an increased risk of intraoperative complications. The use of the nucleotomy of the femtosecond in multiple publications has shown a reduction in the effective phaco time. This is more when we use smaller grids, for example, 350 microns as against 500. And the advantages are also more pronounced in harder grades of cataracts. So what does this essentially give you? It gives you clearer corneas, lesser inflammation, and good visual outcomes immediately. This is a case of a dense nuclear sclerosis wherein I'm just showing you the matrix pattern on the LensX platform. It essentially breaks the nucleus into small cubes. So you can see that there are horizontal cuts interspersed by vertical cuts, and the nucleotomy occurs. This is another case of a leathery hard cataract. It's a brown to black cataract wherein the femtosecond has given a nucleotomy of 6 quadrants. you can see that the cleavage with the femtosecond is through and through, and it allows for a subsequent ease in separating these leathery spines and removing them. The bubbles that you saw escaping were essentially secondary to the nemodissection of the femtosecond laser. The posterior polar cataract is another challenging case. It has an increased propensity for a posterior capsular rent or a nucleus drop. Now, apart from the capsulotomy, which is very important, another advantage that the femto gives you is that it allows a femtodelineation, wherein you can make this thick epinuclear cushion. So how that helps is that it protects the underlying posterior capsule from all the pressure fluctuations that are happening while you're dealing with the core of the nucleus. This can either be done in concentric circles, or other papers have been published wherein they have also added sectors to the same pattern. Another major advantage is the use of the inbuilt ASOCT which the machine has, which allows you to judge the integrity of the posterior capsule. So there have been a handful of publications wherein they have applied a preoperative ASOCT to assess the risk of intraoperative dehiscence, but there have been limitations in terms of the fact that either it was a retrospective cohort or a very limited sample size, or in a study where larger PPCs of more than 4 millimeters were just excluded. So to overcome these limitations, we had studied the use of the ASOCT with the femtosecond in eyes which underwent PPC in a sample of 50 eyes, and we noted that the negative predictive value was 100%, which essentially means that if the capsule looked intact on the ASOCT, there was no intraoperative dehiscence. 4 of the 7 eyes developed a PCR. Of the remaining 3, where the capsule did not look intact, it could have been because of any aftershadowing from the posterior plaque, wherein we were led to believe that there was a discontinuity. So the important point here is that the ASOCT shows you an intact posterior capsule. The risk of an intraoperative PCR is very rare. So just to sum up the points of the PPC with this video, you can see on the ASOCT that there is a discontinuation of the posterior capsule. So one simply increases the offset of the posterior nucleotomy to give you a thicker epinuclear cushion for the subsequent maneuvers. There was an associated nuclear sclerosis, because of which we've done a softening along with the segmentation. You can appreciate a free-floating capsulotomy on the table. Once this is removed, the nucleotomy can now be done with relative ease because the pieces have already been separated, and this can be done with minimal manipulation and no rotation, which is very important for the posterior polar cataracts. All throughout, there is a thick epinuclear cushion behind, which is protecting the posterior capsule from all the fluctuations that are happening in the anterior chamber at the moment. This can then be removed in toto. You just dilate out of the bag and simply aspirate it. Dr. Ramamurthy has already alluded to this earlier. This is a case of flax in a gross subluxation. This was a Marfan syndrome where you can see that there's a gross subluxation, and the loss of the zonules can also be noted on the ASOCT. So the simple caveat to remember here is that you have to center the capsulotomy onto the subluxated bag, both in terms of the size that is available and the centration. The remaining procedure has already been discussed in great detail. The fact that you can get a good capsulotomy is very important as a framework for the subsequent insertion of the hooks or the rings. A vitrectomized eye also poses challenges in its own unique way. So this is a case of a post-vitrectomized eye with silicone oil in situ. Again, the anterior segment OCT will help to show you the integrity of the posterior capsule. You'll see that again, like the PPC, we've increased the offset to give you a thicker epinuclear cushion. The nucleotomy here would help to remove this nuclear fragment with lower phaco energy, which is important in cases of compromised corneas. You can see a silicon reflex in the posterior segment once the cortex has been removed. A word of caution, however, is that one should look for emulsified silicone oil in the anterior chamber. You can see in this case report that there is a globule of silicone oil with an aftershadowing behind, which leads to attenuation of the femtosecond laser in a large uncut area of capsulotomy and no nucleotomy as well. So in these cases, it might be preferable to do a conventional phacoemulsification over the femto platform. This is the last case. Glaucoma or high IOPs were initially considered a contraindication for the femtosecond laser. However, with the advent of the liquid optic interface and the soft fit PI, the pressure rises are lower and the femto can be used easily. The only important point to remember here, I would prefer a liquid optics interface as the pressure rises are slightly lower. The important point to remember here that the ring should be slightly decentered in order to include this bleb so that there is no suction loss during the femto delivery. Also, you want to avoid any excessive manipulation or handling of the conjunctiva in that area. So I'd just like to conclude that the technology of FLACS is evolving, and because of that, it's finding its widespread use not only in conventional cases, but also these complex cases. And it is time to take the leap of faith and switch to the power of femto. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kitansha, for an excellent presentation where you have talked about various kinds of different procedures and in difficult situations. I think continuing from here, is Dr. Tityal ready? Can we have Dr. Tityal, please? Gaurav, you are back also? Yeah, Dr. Tityal will be talking. As we all know, he is one of the finest surgeons that India has. And he's a professor and head of department and soon going to be chief of RP Center. He's going to talk about the surgical management of posterior polar cataract. Jeevan, all yours.
Yeah, thank you, sir. It's wonderful to be with you in this very, very interesting and important instruction course. As we know, posterior polar cataracts do have its own associated surgical problems with surgeons, and patients will have some sort of doubt and they might consult many surgeons before they opt for surgery in some cases. Just to show a video how we tackle these cases of posterior polar cataract, it is beyond imagination to say that examination of these cases are very, very critical by good slit lamp assessment of hardness of nucleus, the posterior capsular integrity and size of disc and thickness of disc is also very, very important. In cases of pre-existing posterior capsular dehiscence, you have to look into the anterior vitreous face also. In total cataract, sometimes you may have to do a UVM to see what is behind the posterior capsular area. The rhexis has to be well sized, around 5 millimeters is a good size rhexis for these patients. I normally don't engage into an oval side rhexis for these cases. I think central rhexis is a desirable size for these patients. And conventionally, we avoid hydrodissection all these cases, decrease the pressure, remove the scholastic. This is one hydrodelineation you can see here. And we'll do another hydrodelineation. So we have 2 rings of hydrodelineation and that will safeguard us from the posterior capsule. So we have a cushion of epicortex, which will maintain the integrity of complex till the end of surgery. Subsequently, surgery becomes very simple. You have a moderate parameter, moderate IOP, moderate aspiration flow rate and vacuum. And most of the time it is zero phaco procedure. You have to do a central sculpting to get into the core of first core of a nucleus. Then subsequently we can take out the entire core layer by layer. So this is a layer by layer phaco which we are doing here. And subsequently remove the central area. See, this nucleus is mobile, but epicortex is still attached. That is how it's going to save. Now we are going to take out the first layer of epicortex. This is a primary layer of epicortex which comes out quite smoothly. So we'll be left with a epicortex and cortical cushion subsequently. And that has to be taken in a very diligently because you still may have a posterior capsule attached to the entire complex. So we'll just take out the periphery part of epicortex, make sure that we don't come to the center. So this is what we'll do. Take out the central area. Now we'll go to periphery, pull out this little bit from all sides. So this will allow the internal hydrodissection to happen at this stage because now we have taken out the entire nucleus. Even you have a posterior capsular dehiscence, you can still manage this case without a serious complication. So you can see we are, to the end of surgery, we have removed the entire block of epicortex and leave the entire clean posterior capsule subsequently, and you can put any desirable IOL subsequently. In these cases, you have signed off a posterior capsular disc defect. This recently we described in JCRS. And once you see this disc defect, which normally occurs towards the end of your procedure, or it may be towards after a nucleotomy or after epicortical cushion removal. Sometimes you have a complete disc, sometimes you have an incomplete disc, and almost 87% of cases you will see this clear disc, and that's an indication of safety for your patient. Around 9 eyes of around 80 patients, we didn't see the disc. In those cases, we had either complete addition of a posterior complex of this polar cataract to the posterior. You can see this stress line coming to the posterior capsule. So this indicates that this would have dehiscence of posterior capsule. You have to be very, very careful. You can see the elliptical tear coming up in these cases. In 9 cases, we didn't have this defect sign, and of that, 3 patients had a posterior capsular dehiscence in these cases. So if you can see this disc defect, it is a sign that you are in a safe hands. Just to show a similar case, this is a type 2 polar cataract as per the OCT classification. I'll just go to the last stage of surgery. After we remove the nucleus here, I'm towards the epicortical removal now. You can see the entire epicortex can be seen in the OCT here. And just see how it goes. Once you remove the thick epicortex, you'll see the defect coming up now. This is a disc defect in the epicortical cushion or a cortical disc defect. Once you see this, you are pretty safe that your capsule will be intact and don't have to worry. You can see that posterior capsule is rightly intact, and you can use any type of IOL. In fact, this patient, we could put the lens very, very effectively as such. I think there is a role of OCT assessment in pre-op, like anti-segment OCT, or a good microscopic examination. If you have an IOCT attached microscope, that will give much more information. This is our classification, 3 types of posterior polar cataract, except for open posterior capsule here. The type 1, where you have a very nice disc seen, and the central capsule can also be visualized apart from the disc. Type 2, central area is not visible, but periphery, you can still delineate the posterior capsule apart from the disc size, which can be seen here. Type 3, the one which is difficult, where you can't see the entire length of a posterior capsule from the disc, and these cases may have more chances of posterior capsular dehiscence happening. So this is a type 3 variety of a posterior polar cataract, and we have seen that these cases also have a slightly denser nucleus. So denser the nucleus, larger the disc, will have more chances of complex getting adherent to the posterior capsule, and will have more chances of rupturing in the process. So we do hydrodelineation only, we don't do hydrodissection. You can see after nucleus removal, entire disc is attached, and central area may also be attached to the posterior capsule. So these cases will have more chances of posterior capsule opening up. So type 2, type 3, we do have a certain chance of a capsular rupture happening. Type 1, where you can delineate the entire posterior capsule, which may be sometimes can be classified as a posterior subcapsular looking like a posterior polar. Their chances of rupture is very minimal. Same thing can be assessed in a OCT, which you see in a femtosecond devices. Dr. Mahipal has nicely described this OCT picturization to identify the ruptured or open posterior capsule. This picture can give you all the details, and accordingly you can manage these cases. You can make a safety of rings, or you make a combination of chop and safety, and that makes things easier. I would say if you have a good examination, and if you have OCT assessment, you can delineate the type 1 from the type 2, type 3. Type 1, you can do hydrodissection, and surgery becomes very simple, fast, without damaging the posterior capsule. Type 2 and 3, where you have a posterior capsule cannot be delineated, the size is more than 4 millimeter. Those cases, you should avoid hydrodissection, do a delineation, complete your nucleotomy, and pull the epicortex slowly from periphery towards the center. Don't take out completely. Wait for an internal delineation dissection to happen. And subsequently, you can remove in block the entire epicortical cushion. To summarize, posterior polar, the chances of rupture is quite less now with understanding of entire morphology and dynamics. Slow motion phaco with whatever machine you are used to should be done. Hydrodissection, yes, for a delineated posterior capsule, clearly with your examination. Avoid in type 2, type 3, and type 4 with the capsule already open. OCT may help you deciding what step you have to do. IOCT might prevent you in doing a hydrodissection in some cases, but IOCT per se may not prevent the incidence of PCR happening in cases of type 3 and type 4. Femtosecond, yes, it is a good tool where we know that it's going to help in a difficult situation like posterior cataract. And thank you, sir, for getting me into this course. And it was wonderful to be associated with you.
Thank you, Dr. Tityal. Are you here for some time?
Yes, yes, I'm there. I'm
Okay,
free.
fine. So actually, Gaurav has to leave, so I will love to ask you a couple of questions on your excellent presentation, because they're very fantastic, and I think audience should have a couple of tips. Now we have Dr. Gaurav Luthra. As we all know, he's a great person and a great surgeon, and he runs the Drishti Eye Hospital at Dehradun. And he'll be talking about the iris repair, iridodialysis, and pupil, how to get the pupil back, the fourth row pupilloplasty. Gaurav, please.
Thank you so much, Maipal sir, and it's really a privilege to be part of your course. And thank you so much for inviting me, and loved the previous talks as well. So I'll try to share some pearls that I've picked up on the way for repairing some of these patients who have iris defects and pupil defects. So this was a patient with traumatic mydriasis with a subluxated lens and a bead of vitreous coming into towards the cornea and stuck to the cornea. So we plan to do a femto-assisted cataract surgery for this patient. And while removing the cataract was the usual stuff, because this bag had some dehiscence, so we had to plan something for ensuring that the bag was stable as well. So after removing the nucleus, we had to use a CTR, and once the cortex has been aspirated, you can put in a CTR when you want, when the bag starts collapsing, if it does. Otherwise, to support the equator of the bag, it is a good idea to support the bag with a CTR. So here we are putting in a CTR, and once the CTR is in, that's how I would rotate it and support it. You put it in a lens into the bag. And at this point now, once the lens is inside, we are ready to manage the pupil. I'm trying to inject pilocarpine to see if it helps. There's a small bead of vitreous which was stuck to the cornea, but there was no other vitreous. So we've decided to just snip it there, and it doesn't trouble us after that because the CTR is already in place. So with pupil, with pilocarpine, there was no impact on the pupil at all. So we decided to go in with and you can see here that while we've seen innumerable videos on single pass fourth row pupilloplasty, I like to use a guide for the needle, because otherwise if you don't use a guide, sometimes your needle will pass through, it'll take a bite of the cornea, and you maybe end up with having a small tag over there, and it might just spoil the whole surgery. And then it's always very important to hold the iris very close to where you want to pass the suture from both sides, and then you can easily go and use a 26 gauge needle to help the passage of the other needle through that. There are two ways to do it. You can pass the needle through and through over there, and after that bring it out. Some people like to just hold the iris and pass the needle through the iris and then bring it out from the other side and then just tie the loop. So this was one of the ways that you can do it, and then you can pull a loop out from there, and after that you can do a single pass fourth row pupilloplasty quite easily. So for one single loop and then 4 throws through that, and then just tighten it. It will just go through that, and then you have the iris opposing over there, comes out nice, and then you can go snip it, and that gives you a good thing. Now you can sometimes have another situation where you have to repair a bigger defect, and you might want to pass 2 or 3 or even 4 sutures, and here we are going through the inferior defect first and trying to make the pupil smaller. This is another patient with a traumatic mydriasis. So once you bring that out, then you can go back and bring a small loop out from there. And then through this loop, you can, so this is something very similar to the Sipsa's knot, which was done before, but Dr. Amar has been able to really simplify this for everybody to use. And, it was always a pain to initially, try to do these procedures, and one would be always thinking, and then there is the iris encirclage procedure as well. So here it has made life so much easier because it's really a simple way of dealing with these traumatic mydriasis cases and pupil defects, and sometimes even with the colobomas. You can actually bring them back into the center and have excellent centration of the colobomas, and you can do a small sphincterotomy there. So we are passing a second suture here, and once the second suture is passed, you will be able to have a central pupil which is more physiologically of the right size. So again, pulling out one loop. This one is fast forwarded, and that one was as Dr. Tityal said, slow and easy. Echo. So here we've been able to pass the suture in the single pass four-throw technique and then snipping it there. This gives you well-centered pupil, and since that defect was fairly large, we decided to go in with a third suture and close that out, and at the end it starts looking so much more presentable. I will stick to time and just show you this last video where we have a big iridodialysis from trauma as well, and with a cataract and which is subluxated, and now these patients require special care because the pupil needs to be supported, and first you have to clear off the cataract while you support this, so you can use iris hooks to move the iris away, and after that you can proceed with cataract surgery as usual. Of course, the lens is subluxated, so you might want to support that as well, but the iris defect is the one which is going to take the most attention here. So you can go ahead with the cataract surgery, and once the cataract is out, you'll be left with the task of, now we put in a CTR, again a subluxated cataract there. This lady was operated pterygium, and you'll see nasally that there was a scarred conjunctiva where we are planning to do the iris repair. So we had to make a plan of trying not to interfere too much with the iris. So we had planned to use Hoffman pockets, and since the iridodialysis was quite a large one, it was going to require 2 or 3 sutures at least to, in fact more than that. So as we started this was a teaching video because, in the first suture that we passed, we made a small blunder of, not holding on to the iris when we pass the first needle, and we are creating a Hoffman pocket here. So creating the Hoffman pocket requires your planes to be right, because you have to go along the plane of the sclera. If you don't have the correct plane, you may either go too deep or too superficial, and then you may be in a situation. Now, this is what I was talking about. This is something which you have to always avoid. And this was like a big problem where we tried to pass the suture outside in. This is a 10-0 Prolene here. And we ended up increasing the dialysis a little bit because I was not supporting it was difficult to reach in this area and hold the iris while the needle was passed. So I had just been a little lazy, and we ended up creating a big hyphema, and the iris started popping out. And I thought that this is over and, we're going to have a bad situation. But, persistence, and if you remain calm and patient, you can manage these cases fairly well. And went back and supported the iris. And because the mistake we had made was that we had released both the iris hooks, and now we have learned our lesson. So just watch how I'm doing it now. What I'm doing is that I'm no longer, since it's again tight to go inside and hold the iris over there, ideal thing would have been to go with the forceps and hold this, but my main input is here, and I'm passing the suture in this direction. So what I'm doing is I'm doing a handshake technique where I'm actually holding the 26 gauge which has been passed outside in, and keeping it right next to the plain place where I want to pass the suture through the iris, and then the 10-0 Prolene needle goes right there. So you are basically sandwiching that edge of the iris where you want to pass the suture, and then pushing this through. So this has very good control because the iris will not get pulled anywhere. Just watch, and it's a very, very controlled way of passing the suture, and can be used for almost all iris repair techniques where you need to pass sutures through the iris. You don't necessarily have to hold them with a forceps. If you are having, it's like chopstick technique or whatever you might want to call it, where you are bringing the two instruments, the two needles very close, and then taking a bite through the suture. So a second Hoffman's pocket there, and then using the same technique of passing the second suture, and then. So you realize that because of I want to preserve the conjunctiva on this side, I did not want to make, otherwise I would have had to make a big conjunctival flap over here because there were almost 3-4 sutures to be passed, unless we use some other technique like the Yamane kind of a suture fixation, which I'm not aware of. If there is one for fixating the iris, I'm sure there is. Today's surgeries are so innovative. We've done 2 of the sutures now. Now this was the third one, which was very tight because this was in an area where access was very tough. So you can see that I'm going, it's a nasal quadrant where, for a right-handed surgeon on the left eye, it is difficult to, make a Hoffman's plane over there, and it's, kind of very close to the tunnel as well, my main port. Somehow I managed to pass the sutures, and I'm able to use the same technique where now I've learned my lessons that the iris can be, caught between the two needles and then it does not get any pull. And this was almost a 2-year-old video. After that, my iris suturing techniques have been transformed. But I love to show this because this teaches you what you can go wrong with. And now, luckily, I don't go wrong with these. This patient did extremely well. This was a 2-3 weeks post-op. She became almost plano in the left eye and she became 6'6", unaided 6'9", and it was a good procedure. So thank you so much, sir, for allowing me to show these few videos and allowing me to also speak at this time. Thank you so much.
Excellent presentation, Dr. Gaurav. Dr. Titial, would you wish to comment on it? Gaurav, as regards the fourth row pupilloplasty that you are having, do you consider a small pupil like what Amar talks about, making it to 2 millimeters, a problem as regards retinal thing?
Absolutely, sir. For pinhole, I'm not like a big fan of the pinhole pupilloplasty, although Dr. Amar shows amazing results with patients improving by 1 or 2 or 3 lines. But somehow, that really small 1.52 mm pupil that sir is able to produce, and with the Purkinje images, I, sometimes I'm a little scared of doing those. I understand that the pinhole effect will be there, but maybe for that we can use the pinhole IOL as well. Those are available, and that can probably do the same thing without having to, do so much. But I would love to hear what everybody else would like to say.
Dr.
I think I have a same opinion. I can well understand people making to a pinhole may decrease the aberrations, but unfortunately that also closes the window towards a posterior segment. And all these cases may be very complicated cases, and they would have chances of posterior segment problem in future. And subsequent assessment can be difficult, and the treatment, if required, may be more difficult, that you may have to undo everything at that time. In fact, I'm very fond of giving a pupil optic contact lenses in such patients. If they are young patient, unilateral patient, I've tried it in many patients, and it works wonderfully well for these patients. And you can always take it out whenever patient is not happy with that contact lens. Or people have can be given other options like glasses, decrease the light going through. But I don't know if that is going to work on long term. For an immediate post-op, it would be all right.
So there was one award-winning video of a special pinhole IOL where you can use the IOL and it allows full imaging through it, because it allows the imaging systems or the retinal imaging systems, they can penetrate the using their other light. I'm forgetting the name of that light, but so that is a special lens which can be used.
Dr. Titial, your description of the grading of the posterior polar cataract is really fantastic. And my question to you is, has the OCT, whether you're looking at it pre-operatively, intraoperatively, with the femtolaser and then intraoperatively, has it reduced your incidence of nuclear drop?
No, that I think I did say that line, that it does not decrease the incidence of posterior capsular dehiscence.
I'm talking of drop.
Yeah, drop none, sir. Because now the surgery has become so effective in all our hands. Drop is very rare nowadays in any type of cataract surgery, and that's true with the posterior polar also. We can effectively manage even a large opening in the posterior capsule. And luckily, the most posterior polar younger patient, it is very rare to have a drop. It is only those cases where you have a totally dense cataract, total white cataract, you have not realized. I have only one video till date in last so many years where the nucleus dropped before I did anything. I did a capsular access and thought I'll do a hydro, and nucleus went down.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I yet to have that instance to be there now.
So actually, a lot of times the patients do not tell that they had a problem of a polar, and they come with a white cataract. That is the time when you have the biggest issue. And I had one case, and actually you should look at the other eye. The other eye was a complication. Then he told me, no, this happened, and I had gone to this retina surgeon and to take it out and things like that. So I just did the hydro because it was a white cataract, and bloom it went down. This I'm talking maybe 2002 or 2003, and I was surprised at what it is, and you probe them. So it is always good to, in a polar cataract, have the history for the other eye that is there.
That is true, sir.
Thank you. Dr. Hemlata, can I make my presentation?
Yeah, sure, sir.
Okay, thank you. I'll be talking about the use of the third hand for anterior segment surgeon for doing the surgery, the posterior segment help that you want to do with the. So let us just see as to how what we call as the third hand, as to how the posterior segment pars plana approach helps
23
us.
gauge micro-incision trocar cannula system forms the backbone of this instrument. It's imperative to understand its component and usage to fully utilize the tricks shown in the subsequent videos. A typical non-valve trocar cannula set consists of 23 gauge trocar cannulas, an infusion pipe, and 3 scleral plugs.
So this is the trocar cannula that you have, that we use, and this is how you fit it. You have to measure accordingly whether you're going in a phakic or a pseudophakic eye. These are self-retaining.
It's a relatively simple technique which can be mastered easily with little practice.
So let us see, when you are looking at these hypermature intumescent cataracts, doing a capsulorhexis, making a small rhexis and then spiraling it out would be there. But sometimes when the intralenticular pressure is so very high that you just make a small nick and you can just get a huge rip, and that is the Argentinian flag sign. And also you may end up in these cases who are associated with phacomorphic glaucoma with expulsive hemorrhage, etc. So this is a problem that you see in the hypermature cataracts. If you have this is a phacomorphic glaucoma. If you have access to the femto, you can get a good capsulotomy and you can get it out. But in this particular case, there was this patient who had phacomorphic glaucoma, high pressure, lot of comorbidities, and would not respond even to the medical therapy. So we had to take her up, this old lady, for cataract surgery. And in this particular case, we are using the third hand, as I call, and all that you have to do is when you put the cannula after the trocar, you put and you just remove the fluid that is there. You don't need to go in, because if you go in, then you could inadvertently, because it's a non-seeing area, you could damage the posterior capsule. So you can see here that the pressure is relieved. Once the pressure is relieved in this particular case, you can see that the capsulorhexis that we are doing goes on pretty well. You can see that it's a small rhexis that we are starting, and then you can spiral it out. And now you can see that the phaco procedure will also go on pretty well. So this hypotony that has been induced by removing this small amount of fluid is something that is helping us do this phaco procedure in a phacomorphic glaucoma, which we would have possibly had a very difficult thing. And then if we had opened it to do an ECC, then maybe or a SICS, there could be an expulsive hemorrhage. So you can see here that when we are going on to the IA, there is a pressure buildup, maybe some fluid misdirection. You can see that the globe has become hard again. So what do we do? You can, all that you have to do is that you just reopen, like the infusion is off at this particular moment, but you just take it out and just remove the excess fluid, and you can see that the eye again becomes soft. And there is absolutely no problem, and you can actually finish the irrigation aspiration and put the intraocular lens. This is just to do a peripheral iridotomy using the vitrectomy cutter. And we just apply one suture, remove this and apply one suture, and that is the end of it. Now, what I will wish to show again is a case where you are using the pars plana approach, where there is a traumatic cataract. You can see there is a big linear tear that is there, and we are trying to remove, and as you get the cortex out, you can see that there is a huge posterior capsular defect also. So if we continue with the anterior approach, there is going to be a problem. So you can use the vitrectomy cutter, go through the pars plana, and use it both either for aspiration or you can use it for the cutting mechanism. So both of them can be used, and then you can see we had already prepared for a posterior segment, and we are going in because we need to take in the vitrectomy cutter. And you can see here that this does not allow the increased hydration of the vitreous, and the vitreous would not come out. So this is what I'm trying to say, is that depending on the mode, foot switch position 2 is the vitrector, here foot switch position 3 is the vitrector. So you can move accordingly when you want to cut first or you want to suck first. So that is depending upon the what you are wanting to do, whether you just want to do a peeling as you are peeling here, you would not want the cutting action to be there. So this is actually a good way that you can do this, and then you can put a 3-piece intraocular lens after you have cleared everything, and the support, we can get a support from the back on the intraocular lens, so that even in this particular case, because the haptic was going in, we were able to nudge it out. So this is a very controlled surgery that we have been able to do with the help of a posterior segment pars plana approach that we had in this particular case. So this is something that I wanted to show as another case. And now you can see this is a post-traumatic subluxated cataract that we have. In this particular case, you can see this is the iris going down, and you will see that we are doing, there is vitreous here that I wanted to show. And it is difficult to have a traction, counter traction, because of the vitreous and the subluxation that is there. So what we will use is the power of femto. You can see that the femto can cut through the vitreous also. And now we have again used the pars plana approach. We have prepared ourselves. You can see that we have put tricot, and the first thing that we do is to decompress the vitreous by removing the vitreous which is coming to the, you can see that this is a vitreous which is coming into the wound. Once we have removed the vitreous, you have a good capsulotomy which is there because of the femto. We had placed it in such a position that once the lens centers, the capsulotomy which will be pretty much centered, and then we are putting the endocapsular ring to cover this particular defect. Since it's a traumatic cataract, we don't expect this cataract to increase the subluxation to increase. And you can see that because of the previous nucleotomy that has been done, the epinuclear removal, the nucleus removal is pretty easy. We are using a bimanual approach to do the irrigation aspiration. And you do not allow the bag to be decompressed, and you put the viscoelastic, and then you put a 3-piece intraocular lens which is there, and you can then again go back and remove any vitreous that is coming there, and then you can actually see that there is a tag of the vitreous, and we will reverse it in the sense that we will use the side port here. After putting an infusion at the from the back, we will just take the cutter from the side port, and we will remove this vitreous, so that the iris which was getting peaked because of the vitreous which was there is taken care of, and you can see that we get a good round pupil at the end of the surgery. So this is the last part, which is the principle where again we are using a pars plana approach for a chandelier's elimination. I think Shreyas is going to talk about it. So it's a self-retaining system, provides good visualization and leaves the wound self-sealing. So you can see here, this is the difference. This is the huge corneal opacity that you can see. We are putting trypan blue so that we can see how the corneal opacity comes into play. And then with the chandelier's endo-illuminator, I'll just show you once the microscope is off and only the chandelier's endo-illuminator is on, you can see that this is where it looks as if the corneal opacity has just disappeared. And you can go ahead, you get a very good 3D kind of an image which is there. Depth perception is fantastic. And you can see that this is where you are able to see the cracking of the nucleus, etc. Everything is so perfect as if the corneal opacity never existed. This is the epinuclear plate that is being taken out. This is the case which we can see where the lens is being put. This is a case with multiple blast injuries, and you can see that the lens, you can easily put it in the bag. So chandelier's endo-illuminator is a fantastic device by which you can actually take care of the cases. This again would require a PK, since there is a ban on doing a PK for foreign patient. This patient came in from, I think, Afghanistan or Iran. So we can, with the chandelier's endo-illuminator, we can go ahead and the patient was one-eyed, and we got a good vision. And this is just to see whether the graft is sticking well or not in case of doing a DSEC. So you can see that we get very good results with the use of the pars plana approach for various different types of surgeries that we have for the cataract surgeon. So thank you very much for your kind attention. Thank you. Dr. Titial, any comments, or we can? Okay. I
think we can go to the next talk. I'll just make one comment, sir.
Okay, sure.
And especially you showed that phakomorphic glaucoma, which we keep seeing these patients.
Yes.
There it works wonderfully well, sir. Even just putting a vitrector there and some 1 or 2 drop fluid comes out, even that is enough to decrease the entire pressure, and you can do a very nice surgery, sir. But in some cases, like it's so that post-traumatic dehiscence of a capsule, there I think it is mandatory to have a pars plana infusion to be ready and do a pars plana procedure, sir. These techniques have really done well in a difficult cases.
Thank you very much, Dr. Titial. I'll now request Dr. Hemlata, who is a consultant, senior consultant with Center for Sight. She's been trained out of Chandigarh, and she'll be talking about managing the hard cataract. Dr. Titial, can you just, Shreyas is the speaker who's left after this. I just have to make a presentation. I'll come back.
Sure, I'll be there. No problem.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, Dr. Hemlata, please.
A very good evening to all of you. Thank you, Dr. Maipal sir, for having me here. Can you see some of my slides?
Yeah, just make it full screen. Yeah.
Is it okay now, sir?
Yes, fine.
Okay, I'll be talking about the management of the hard cataract. So, when you're dealing with the hard brown cataracts like this, virtually every step of the surgery is difficult, because these kind of eyes are associated with a number of ocular comorbidities like absence or near absence of the red reflex, obscuring the intraoperative visibility, compromised endothelium, zonular weakness, and as the lens is thicker, you get reduced working space. And sometimes you see a calcified capsule like this that can give you a really tough time in the operation theater. But there's nothing to get disheartened of. As they say, know your enemy and know yourself, and you can fight 100 battles without disaster. So the first step to the successful surgery is a thorough preoperative evaluation. Look for the pupillary dilatation, zonular weakness, do specular to see if the endothelium allows you to do phacoemulsification. And in most of these patients, as the media is hazy, so before proceeding in for the surgery, always do B scan. Now, having a surgical strategy in place is essential to minimize the risk factors. So keep your aids ready, whatever you're comfortable with: capsular tension ring, capsular support hooks, iris hooks, visco dispersive devices, and trypan blue dye. So it's essential to have good tools, but it is also essential that the tools should be used in the right way. So know your tools well and when and how to use them. So this is from where I will start my presentation. So this, if you want to break the nucleus, just go into the deepest area, that is the center of the nucleus, and go around 80 to 90% depth, and so that the vector forces act like this, and you get a good crack in the center. So here is one such case who had almost like grade 4-5 cataract. So here we are creating a little space in the center to embed the phaco probe to almost 80 to 90% depth, and then gently separate. Too much of lateral force is to be avoided, because at this stage only you can have PC tear if you're applying too much of lateral forces. So once you you are able to get a first crack, then rotate the nucleus and similarly embed your phaco probe almost to 80 to 90% depth, and then gently separate all the leathery fibers. And just make sure before pulling out the nucleus in the center, nuclear piece in the center, just make sure that it is separated from all the sides. So there's hardly any epinuclear cushion in these kind of patients. So always keep on injecting viscoelastic or visco-dispersive device so that you push the posterior capsule back, and also to protect the endothelium. And since you may encounter zonular weakness also, so just take care that your nuclear pieces are separated very well before you pull out in the center. See how black the cataract is on the posterior side. And sometimes the other problem with these patients is that there is clogging of the phaco tip because of the what we call as phaco smoke. And to avoid that, just clear the tip, check for the inflow and outflow, and then again proceed with the surgery. Otherwise, you might end up in causing wound burn. So when you're dealing with the last piece, reduce your parameters and then inject viscodispersive device again to inflate the back so that you have good working space and you don't touch the posterior capsule. There's hardly any cortical metal left, and rest of the surgery is routine. Now, in this particular case, when we started the surgery, you can see the wrinkling of the capsule over here. So when we are doing the manual capsulorhexis, we realize that there is a 360-degree zonular weakness. Now, before proceeding for the further phacoemulsification, here I apply iris hooks. You can use either iris hooks or capsular hooks to support the capsular bag. And once the iris hooks are in place, the next step is to insert the capsular tension ring to stabilize the capsular bag further. So once your capsule is well supported with the capsular, with the iris hooks or capsular hooks and stabilized with capsular tension ring, then whether you're dealing with grade 2, 3 cataract like this or grade 4, 5, rest of the surgery, you can avoid complications to a great extent. So the purpose of showing this video was that you should use the iris hooks or support systems at the right stage. And if you are expecting zonular weakness like this, always try to implant 3-piece IOL rather than single-piece IOL. So here is another case where we did femtosecond laser for this almost rock hard cataract. So the beauty of the femto is that you get a very good capsulorhexis. Here it was somewhere around 5.5 millimeter. And femto laser is able to penetrate even in this dense cataract. So you can get a good crack. So the thing is that you need to go into the same plane that is created by the femto laser, embed the nucleus and just try to release the OBL. So the trick in femto is there is a little OBL behind the lens. Already your lens is thicker, so the capsule is already distended. So first release the OBL and then try to separate the nuclear pieces. So it's very hard and there are leathery fibers in the center. So with gentle forces, we are trying to break the nucleus and always make, I am again emphasizing, just make sure that your nuclear piece is separate from all the sides before pulling it in the center. Otherwise, you may end up in causing zonular dialysis. See how black the cataract is there in the center. Another problem with this kind of case is that sometimes the nuclear pieces, they keep on moving here and there and get lodged behind the iris. And that might induce a little inflammation or increase in intraocular pressure later on. So once you're doing this kind of hard case, always make sure at the end of the surgery, just examine, if your pupil comes down, you can use Y manipulator to look beneath the iris if there is any piece left and then remove it. For this hard cataract, actually you need to work on optimal parameters. And with the newer machines, you have very good phacofluidics. So there is hardly any surge and chamber stability is excellent. So in the past few years, actually, because of the higher end machines also, we are able to deal with such hard cataracts without causing any damage to the eye. So again, when you're dealing with this last piece, just try that you don't touch the pupil and you inject the viscodispersive device to push the PC back and to remove rest of the nuclear fragment safely. So here you reduce your parameters, put visco, and this is the last fragment that will be taking out. So there's hardly any cortical matter in this patient. There's a little central PC plaque that we decided to left behind. We'll deal with that later on with the help of Fendi arc caps. And here we are injecting a single piece lens inside the eye. So another important thing is to do the visco wash thoroughly. Spend time and remove all the visco, because we have been using viscodispersive device for these kind of patients. And if you leave the visco inside the eye, that can again induce inflammation and increase the intraocular pressure later on. So the points to remember in these kind of patient is, first, do thorough preoperative evaluation. Always check the endothelium, plan beforehand, keep the backup ready. To avoid wound burn, check the inflow and outflow if there is any clogging. And always inject viscodispersive device when you're dealing with the last fragments and you reduce your phaco parameters also. And despite all this, if you get posterior capsular rent, the management depends upon the stage of the surgical procedure at which the PCR is detected. And post-operatively, always keep a check on the inflammation and intraocular pressure. Thank you all for the patient listening.
Thank you, Dr. Hemlata. It was wonderful talk from your side. We all know, Dr. Suresh, you can share your
Yes, sir.
presentation. Hard cataract is difficult, but you have shown all the tricks which can be helpful to all the young people who are watching this session. Invite Dr. Shreyas, who's a young, enthusiastic, very talented, terrific surgeon.
Dr. Tityal,
And, yeah.
Do you think there is a slight discussion that is happening? Do you increase the rep rate for hard cataracts, or you just from the femto, or you just do the normal rep rates?
Sir, I go the normal parameter. I have not changed anything in these, because increasing the repetition rate or energy sometimes doesn't help in these cases, because you as such require a more energy to to make softening of the hard cataracts, and it doesn't really work out in most super hard cataracts. I normally do a chop type of pattern in these cases, which gives a nice separation rather than trying to do a grid in those cases.
Shreyas, all yours. Shreyas, maybe introduce Dr. Tityal.
Yeah. I think as I said, a wonderful person, and he can see through anything, and he'll make us see through the hazy corneas also. Yeah, Shreyas, all yours.
Very, very, very kind of you, sir. At the outset, I apologize for the delay in joining in. I was the other session which I was part of was running a little late. So I will take you all through phacoemulsification in hazy and compromised corneas, essentially a video-based presentation, and I'll discuss different scenarios and how we can use it. So first and most common thing that we come across as a corneal surgeon is the cataract we operated in the setting of a trauma. So the basic advice is to ensure that all the suture removal is complete so that we get some kind of repeatable K reading before we proceed with the surgery. In these patients where there has been an insult to the anterior lens capsule, you can have some fibrotic membranes and some synechiae. So it's important that we cut them and try to get some kind of capsulorhexis and then go ahead. There should be no hydrodissection which is done in these procedures, as you could have a breach of ALC and a breach of posterior capsule also. So hydro could extend that break. And subsequently, once the phaco is done, usually these cataracts are soft. You could have a 3-piece IOL in standby. And if adequate capsular support is there, as in this particular case, you could go ahead and directly implant it in the bag itself. The second most important thing that we come across is severe dry eye situations. And it is extremely important that we optimize the ocular surface before cataract surgery. Now, this is an extreme situation where I'm showing you, where this is a patient with post-Steven-Johnson syndrome, whose lid margin is extremely keratinized and is abrading the corneal surface and causing recurrent breakdowns, vascularization, and opacification. So if we directly go ahead with the cataract surgery, we could end up with a corneal melt, and therefore you do a mucous membrane graft as done in this case, optimize the surface. Even in other patients with patients like rheumatoid arthritis and other systemic disorders, we need to give them adequate immunosuppression, stabilize the ocular surface before proceeding. The cataract surgery itself need not be very challenging. In this case, there is a little bit of opacification. When you have opacity, it's important that you complete the capsulorhexis away from the site of opacity. That's a small mistake I've done here, where the final flap was under the opacity and I needed to reverse it and then complete it in the opposite direction. Then you can tilt the globe a little away and do the chopping maneuvers in the region where you have sufficient visibility, and then subsequently do this. In such situations like in SJS and OCP, a corneal transplant is not possible. So our aim is to really stabilize the ocular surface, do a good cataract surgery in these patients, and then after optimizing the surface, we can implant them with scleral contact lenses. And this patient went on to have 6/12 vision with scleral contact lenses. In these patients with failed grafts, where you're trying to combine the surgery with endothelial keratoplasty. You could temporarily deturgescence of the cornea can be achieved by using glycerol. You could also use chandelier illumination, which has been shown by multiple surgeons. And this can be done to improve your visibility, and then do a safe in the bag phaco. Now, the importance of achieving a good phaco here is because you want to implant the IOL in the bag and have a stable IOL in place, because this is important during your subsequent endothelial keratoplasty maneuvers, because anything where the IOL is not stable will not allow you to have a stable air bubble in place, which is necessary for your tamponade, for your pressing the graft against your endothelium. Subsequent to the cataract surgery, it becomes a whole lot easier. Generally, in the patients with extremely compromised views, you'd go in for a DSEK rather than a DMEC procedure. And because DSEK can be done even when the visibility is quite compromised, you need to achieve a tight fill in these failed grafts. Achieving a tight fill can be challenging, and you need to ensure you've adequately sutured all the ports, including the pars plana ports, and then complete the surgery. This is another situation where you have a dense glaucoma with surface secondary spheroidal changes. Here you have to do a PK to improve the overall visual outcome. But even in a PK, when we are going to do a ECC procedure, rather than to do a completely open sky procedure, especially in such cases where you have a very large voluminous lens, which can, which when you come out, it can actually cause sudden decompression and predispose to suprachoroidal hemorrhages. So you could do a partial trephination or in the partial cut of the graft rim, and so that you leave it as a cap, and then keep it there till you remove the entire nucleus, do the aspiration and implant the IOL, and only then cut the remaining part of the graft. Because any sudden decompression, if it does occur, you have the cap to suture back and to salvage the situation and prevent any worsening or any expulsion from happening. And then subsequently, it's a fairly straightforward IOL implantation and doing the procedure. This is another situation where you have a adherent glaucoma in these patients. Now, this adherent glaucoma is again present from childhood, and these patients will not benefit from a PK. They have always been used to seeing through the visual axis above the area of the glaucoma. It's better not to touch the iris itself, because that area of the cornea can actually be thinner, and we don't want to do any synecholysis. Just leave the iris as it is. All we need to do is just decenter our rexes, use hooks if necessary, and then do the entire chopping maneuvers in the area where you have visibility in the superior half. So you could just tilt the globe a little inferiorly, and so that more amount of the cataract comes into visualization, and then go ahead and do the chopping maneuvers, and then the cortex aspiration and the IOL can be implanted. So important that we avoid handling the synechiae part and tilt the globe inferiorly and then complete the cases. This is just a final video where I'm showing a situation where in these cases, we want to plan between a staged and a combined surgery. Now, this is a patient who, after a therapeutic graft, had developed an intumescent cataract due to the inflammation in the early postoperative period and also extensive pus. So in this period, in the early postoperative period, doing endothelial keratoplasty, the prognosis may not be very good. And sometimes you might be surprised that endothelial keratoplasty may not even be required. In this case, what we are doing is trying to release the synechiae, and then after doing a capsulotomy and removing the fibrotic membranes over the anterior lens capsule, these cataracts are usually soft and can be aspirated. But you want to also keep it as away from the endothelium as possible. Use viscoadaptive viscoelastics, and then just with phaco aspiration and minimal phaco energy, try and remove the entire nucleus in toto, and the IOL can be implanted. In this particular case, I was actually able to just get away with a phaco surgery after the the synechiae had been released and the IOP had been controlled. This graft actually cleared up, and we were able to salvage this graft, and this patient is still maintaining a 6/18 vision, best corrected visual acuity. So it's not necessary that all these cases have to be combined. You could do a staged procedure also, and only decide to do an endothelial keratoplasty if the graft fails or in toto. So thank you so much for your kind attention.
Yeah, Shreyas, you did a wonderful job in these cases. We understand these cases are difficult, but as you showed, we can achieve some improvement within without disturbing the cornea as such. And some people may be one-eyed and looking into the results of keratoplasty in our country and giving 618, 624 vision is a real achievement in these cases. And you rightly stressed on the difficult situations. I think all corneal surgeons have to deal with these type of cases and plan sequentially, as you rightly pointed out. Sequential surgery is the key in all these difficult situations. I think so. We are in time. I think there's another 1 or 2 minutes left with us. Any other point you'd like to say, Shreyas?
Sir, the other common problem, which I think maybe not necessarily presents to a corneal surgeon, but very often to a cataract surgeon or a general ophthalmologist, is the frequent incidence of dry eye patients, connective tissue disorder patients, rheumatoid arthritis patients, where on a first casual examination, it might appear okay and they may proceed with the cataract surgery. But if not, if the surface has not been adequately stabilized and the adequate immunosuppression has not been achieved, the result can be quite disastrous, and we can result in persistent epithelial defects and corneal melts in the postoperative period. So that is one point I'd like to add.
Yeah, that's a very good point you have raised. I think your first starting talk was based on this only. I think it's a very important. Many people, they just see cataract and they don't realize what other things are around the cornea, which is so important to assess. And all these older patients, they can have so many other systemic comorbidities, and especially a patient with autoimmune disorders or people with rheumatoid arthritis. Many patients will come to us with a lot of immunocompromised situations. Especially, I've seen many patients come with cycloimmune, other therapies. Patient with chemotherapy post cancer treatment, they all have they look little different because ocular surface definitely will be involved. And if you just put a 1 drop of fluorescein in these patients in the conjunctiva, it releases so many things.
Yes.
So I normally advise young people, whichever case you are seeing, cornea, cataract, never leave a fluorescein examination of the eye. That tells you everything. You don't have to do all those fancy tests to see what is your tear film. And just fluorescein dye in all patients. Like we talk about, do a optical biometry first in a cataract patient. Similarly, for cornea, you must put a fluorescein, and that is what's going to save your day subsequently.
Sir, I have a question for Shreyas, if the time permits. So these kind of rheumatoid arthritis or autoimmune patients with autoimmune disorders, when they come with corneal opacities and cataract, is it safe to use chandelier in those kind of patients?
Yes, madam. I mean, chandelier illumination can definitely be used wherever necessary, madam. And
what about the risk of scleral necrosis?
No, a pars plana port itself may not incite a scleral necrosis. Just the same way where a corneal incision is not going to incite a corneal melt. The idea is to ensure that their systemic parameters, we do a basic systemic workup, ensure that all the acute phase reactants, RA factors are all under control before we go ahead with the surgery. If they are adequately immunosuppressed, then these patients do extremely well, and their outcomes are quite similar to and the post-op inflammation will actually be quite similar to a routine cataract surgery patient.
I think you are absolutely correct, Shreyas. If patient only has an ocular surface problem or a sort of a dryness and doesn't have a scleral involvement, then pars plana may be more safer because that's well beyond the active area of limbus and cornea, and it is well covered with TLens and conjunctiva. So melting chances are less unless you do a large incision, a lot of sutures. That might create a problem. But looking into ocular surface, limbal and surrounding area is more critical. I would avoid multiple incision in a limbal area or a larger incision in limbal area because that is the area where tear film breaks very fast. And immediately you'll have a Dellen formation, and next day entire limbus will melt. Within a few days, the entire cornea can melt in these cases. I think we can now sum up. I think we have had a nice discussion. I think this session had a lot of things. Dr. Mahipal is there now. I'll request him to summarize the entire session. Are you there? We are towards the end of the session. I think we have to conclude.